You know what this is?
A map? A trip?
Just a little tongue-in-cheek, because I knew that you would know what it was. But do you know how to read it? Do you know that we live in a culture today where many people could look at this and not know how to use it to find any kind of direction for their lives? Oh, they would see on the page that up is north and down is south. But that doesn't really give you anything that you might need to follow a direction as you're journeying. You know, technology has been a real blessing to us in so many ways. However, on the other hand, technology has led some folks almost to disaster. Some years ago, when I was the district superintendent, Rosemary and I invited the clergy and their spouses to come to the farm for a picnic. One of the clergy had just purchased a new Goldwing motorcycle, and he wanted to ride it to the farm, and he had GPS. And when they finally got to the farm, he breathed a sigh of relief. There must be a better way to get here, he said. Well, for those of you who know Ratville Road, the GPS took him down Ratville Road to our house on a Goldwing motorcycle. Ratville Road is filled with ruts and rocks. And he was so relieved to have made it safely to our house. It wasn't too long ago that a young salesman was following his GPS in our area and decided that the GPS was going to take him off the main road to a back road in order to get him here. What it did was it took him down a cow path into a field full of mud where he became mired and could not get out. I know this because I saw the car at the corner gas station after it had been rescued. There was mud throughout the engine compartment. All of the underneath of the car was caked with mud as well. His question was to the owner of the gas station, "What do you think I should do?" And the owner said, "Sell this car quickly." GPS and technology were not so helpful to these two situations. What is it that gives guidance to our lives so that we don't end up in kind of disastrous situations? I think about what Amos wrote so many long years ago to God's people, Israel. You know, the guidelines for this people were, one, to be a light to the nations. They were to live life in such a way that their very living would give a sign to people of what God was all about. That the life of the nation would be a reflection of how God cared for and about the people of creation. A light to the nation means that you live in such a way that when people look to that light, they see what's behind it. And they begin to understand that it is a guideline for life itself. We know that there were many other things in the Old Testament where God tried to give direction to the way people ought to live. By the time Amos wrote these words, the rich were getting richer and the poor were getting poorer. Does it sound familiar? Is that not the world in which we seem to live today? And didn't Jesus say at one time, "The rich you will have with you always"? The poor are going to stay poor. Isn't that a condemnation of the world in which we live? Where we cannot share the resources God has made in such a way that it enhances the lives of all of God's people everywhere. Amos saw people making money hand over fist, not just at the expense of other people who were well off, but at the expense of those who were poor and broken by the culture and the society in which they lived. I have often quoted Micah, "What does the Lord require of you? But to love kindness, to do justice, and to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your might. Micah was trying to give people a guideline for the way they needed to live, so that life would be a blessing for all of God's people, not just for some. We are confronted with the same kind of world about which Amos wrote. He knew that life was cheap, and isn't it true that as we look around us, life seems to be so cheap? Even the lives of those who destroy themselves in the act of destroying others, it's as if their life means nothing at all. Or they think that they're doing it for some higher purpose. But this gift of life is a precious gift, made possible by a God who loves creation and who loves the human family that God has made. And God's desire for every one of us is that we should get the most out of life and have the most fulfilling life possible as people. I think about this in terms of Jesus sitting in this home with Mary and Martha. One sister so busy making sure that all the details were well taken care of. The other sister sitting at the feet of Jesus. No, I cannot help but think if the world sat at the feet of Jesus, it would begin to understand what it means to be a gift of God in the world where we live. If we sat at the feet of Jesus. And the question is, it's sort of a metaphor, because Jesus is no longer physically with us. But how do we sit at the feet of Jesus? How do we begin to build that kind of relationship that builds up life and doesn't tear it down? That encourages us and others around us to embrace life rather than to deny life. If we look at what Jesus was doing as he was in this home, and it's most likely that it was the home of Lazarus, because Mary and Martha were sisters of Lazarus, and Jesus was very close with Lazarus as a friend. If we look at these two women, one is busy with details, the other is listening to what Jesus has to say. Isn't it a tragedy that the world in which we live is not listening? Think about that. The world in which we live is not listening. We go about our business as if it were the most important thing we could be doing every single day, when sometimes the necessary thing is to just stop long enough to hear what Jesus might be saying to us about our lives and about the world in which we live. The one sister wants to put Jesus in the middle. He becomes the middleman. Well, you realize, of course, that it's a role that Jesus embraced freely and generously. Because who is the middleman who told us about the love of God that will not let us go? Who is the middleman who gave his life as a ransom for many? Who is this middleman who cares so deeply about the world that God has made, that he goes about from place to place, challenging the authorities of his day in such a way that they begin to see him as a very threat to their way of life and cannot wait to put him on that cross? But it's not so much the institutions and the authorities of the world in which we live, friends. How many times is it me or you or us? We get busy with the being of the day, whatever that is, when we ought to be at the feet of Jesus listening. Because when we truly hear Jesus, and remember the Old Testament said they have ears to hear, but they do not hear. What it really means is the voice falls on your ear, but it doesn't make any difference in the way you live your life. Because when we truly hear, and I suspect that that is exactly what Martha was doing, she was really listening to Jesus, because it was transforming her in such a way that it made her life more fulfilling, more full of purpose and meaning. When we sit at the feet of Jesus and we listen, it truly moves us to be different in our daily walk. Jesus really didn't want to be the middleman between Mary and Martha. That wasn't why he was there. But he did come into the world as the one who stands for us in relationship to the one who creates us and redeems us. And Jesus takes on this role. But we have to sit at the feet of Jesus. And what is Jesus saying to us? Is he not saying the same thing that the Old Testament prophet Micah said? Is he not saying the same thing about how we treat one another? The bottom and most basic question of life is found in relationships. You cannot deny it. If your relationship with the God who loves you is askew, it's most likely that the relationships of your life will also be that way. The biblical mandate says that when God loves us and we love God in return, it is the very source of our strength for living every single day. It is about that. And so if we look to Jesus and we listen to him, what is he saying to us? Be merciful, be right, be kind, be generous, be caring. All of those things that seem to be such a hallmark of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And here we are, preparing ourselves to go back into the world that seems so much like what the Old Testament prophet Amos wrote so many years ago. But if we don't do it, the world will only become worse. It's when we do this that God takes us and puts us in places where we can be transforming presence, and it transforms our lives as well. You know, the strange thing is that Christians are middlemen. We really are. We stand in the gap between justice and injustice, between right and wrong, between hope and despair, between generosity and greed. And that list can go on and on and on, because we are called to be the leaven in the loaf, the presence in a world that's desperate to hear good news. And sometimes it's our own lives where we need to sit at the feet of Jesus and hear what he has to say. Quit being so busy with the stuff of life and really begin to listen to the very heart of the good news. Because when you know without a doubt that Jesus cares and loves you, you know that same love is to be sent into the world around you and to be shared with those within your circle. Even as Jesus is called to be the middleman, pointing us to a God who cares and loves and is committed to us, we are put in the world for that same purpose. Let us not be unwilling. Let us not be so concerned about the details of the day that we miss the message that comes to us from Jesus Christ. Amen.